we have a G suit, but we also train ourselves to literally push the blood back up into our upper extremities. You're doing this while fighting a MiG-29. So pulling HGs, using a maneuver to push your blood back into your upper extremities. And as we're pulling as tight as we can, we literally pass each other completely neutral. Now, I shouldn't have even gotten that far. So my name's Ed Rush. I served in the Marine Corps. I got in 1995. I got out in 2016. I did 11 years active duty, 2 years in the reserves, and the rest of it was just kind of inactive reserve. I got out as a major. So I was born into a family of champions. Let me explain. The year I was born was 1972. My mom was one of the most famous women's basketball coaches of all time. And in 1972, she took a small school called Immaculata College, which is about enrollment of about 400 people, to the national championship and won. So she won her first championship as a women's coach when she was pregnant with me. I like to take some credit for that. And then the next year, she actually won her second national championship. That's when I was like 10 years old. So my first year, actually literally like my first 2 or 3 years, I spent on team buses with this like legendary basketball team going from like game to game to game. And to put it into perspective how great they were, there was this arena in Philadelphia called the Palestra, seats about 4,000 people. And every Friday they would have a women's game and then they would have a men's game. Unlike what you see today where like the women's game would have like 1,000 people and the men's game would have like 4,000, her stands would get packed like an hour early. About 150 of those people were nuns, like full habit nuns, with the full, like, remember from the Blues Brothers, like the black and white cape and everything. And they'd have like 4,500 people for the women's game to watch my mom's team. And by the time the men's game started, they had about 200 people. That's how famous her team was. My dad at the time was like a really famous basketball referee. And so I was born into this like championship success. And then I went on to fail kindergarten. And I always like to tell that story because, I went in the Marine Corps, flew F-18s, was pretty successful at that. But I kind of started life, a couple sandwiches short of a picnic. I like my daughter recently graduated from kindergarten. It is like the most basic subject matter. It's like stacking blocks, not eating the glue. The classes, like her report card, stories, that's one of the classes. Coloring is one of the classes. Naps, there's a nap class. I don't know if you know that about kindergarten. And I was like watching her graduate and I was trying to figure out like how dumb do you have to be to fail this grade? And yet I failed kindergarten. I did a kindergarten twice and still went on to get into the Marine Corps. Cool. So my dad was a famous basketball referee. Started in 1966. He was the youngest basketball referee ever to enter at age 24. The backstory, by the way, was my dad was a football coach and he used basketball refereeing to supplement his income. So he was making about $6,000 a year as a football coach and a teacher at a local school. And he was making about $50 a game or something like that, and was like making another $500 a year. And one day a scout came to look at the referee that my dad was refereeing with, completely ignored that guy, ended up seeing my dad. This is 66. They invited him to New York. Now the NBA office at the time in 1966 had two people. It had the director of the NBA, a guy named Walter Kennedy, and his secretary. That was it. Literally the entire office. Now it's got like hundreds of people. It was these two people. This guy invited my dad up and said, hey, we'd like you to referee in our new NBA. We're adding some new teams. They had 12 teams. They're adding 8 teams. And my dad said, well, I'm really happy. I coach football and like I referee, and he said, I'm making like $7,000, Mr. Kennedy. Like I'm doing really well. And this guy looked at him and said, we're going to give you 80 games this year and we're going to pay you $100 a game. And my dad's like, that's like $8,000, man. He literally shook his hand and said, I'll take it. The next night, my dad was in Madison Square Garden refereeing with Wilt Chamberlain on the court. And the referee at the time told him, look, young guy, I don't need you to do anything except for call out of bounds. That was it. That's all he could do is call out of bounds. My dad ended up going on to be one of the most famous basketball referees of all time. Michael Jordan, Julius Erving, all the way into the Kobe era. He refereed for almost 30 years. One of the most successful basketball referees of all time. And still, my dad's 84. He still mentors and teaches basketball referees. So today, in today's day, if you look across Division I at the best referees, and you look into the NBA at the best referees, at least 50% of those people my dad's mentored, literally, and taught. Probably one of the most influential teachers in the world. I have so much respect and honor for my dad. But yeah, I grew up in this place where I had this dad who was refereeing, with Julius Erving. Like we'd go to the games in Philadelphia and like meet the players and stuff. And then I had this mom who was like this champion. And then I went on to fail kindergarten. So that's the backstory. So I don't remember the year. but it was literally the year after Michael Jordan left North Carolina and was playing for the Bulls. And just to put it in the context, if you remember these days, the Bulls were awful. Actually, like the first 2 or 3 years Jordan played, the Bulls lost every single year because they didn't have enough draft picks to get like really good players around Michael Jordan. But it was an exhibition game. We weren't even in Chicago. We were in Durham, North Carolina. There was an exhibition game that the Bulls were playing against some team down there. And my dad took me on the court before the game, about an hour before the game, and we were just sitting on the side watching the players warm up. And I remember my dad going, "You see that player over there, number 23? He's like, you keep an eye on that guy. He's going to be really good. He came from North Carolina last year, and he's just going to be an epic player in this league." Turns out that guy was Michael Jordan. And my dad refereed basically Michael Jordan's entire career, all through them playing against the bad boys in Detroit and stuff like that. It was really interesting. I never was allowed to do autographs, and I was never allowed to interact with the players in any way other than just to talk to them like normal human beings. So I would get to have these really deep conversations with people like Larry Bird or Michael Jordan or Robert Parrish or Dr. J. I knew his kids and everything like that. And it was interesting, my dad's approach. First of all, he never wanted the referee's kid, to be asking for autographs. And my dad would always teach me, you'd rather have a substantive conversation with someone like on the level than to be treating them like they're some kind of celebrity and just get an autograph. And so I actually learned when I was like 4, 5, 6, 7 years old to talk to people who were influential and celebrities like they were like human beings, you know? And it's interesting that what Dad taught me there early on, like, stayed with me, you know? So now I get introduced to some of the most influential people in the world. I speak at events all around the world, and I'm standing next to people who are like former presidents, prime ministers, stuff like that. And even now that lesson lasted, which is like when you meet influential people, just treat them like normal people and just have a good conversation and be interested in them as people and less interested in like their position or what they can do for you. I would love to tell you that I was like inspired by patriotism. Eventually I was. I would love to tell you like it was a lifelong dream. Me joining the military was a total whim. And it took me about 10 years, by the way, to admit that. At first I was like covering it up. And it started with a lie. Now, I don't like to admit that. I'm a very honorable person. Like I have a high ethics and morality. I teach people nowadays like to talk to God and stuff like that. But I will just tell you, there was a time in my life where I engaged in a conversation and I didn't totally tell the truth. It was at a bar in Annapolis. So I went to school at William & Mary, that's down in Virginia. I grew up in Philly. So on the way from Philly to Virginia was my best friend's house in Annapolis. He went to college with me, and I used to stop at his house for like a day, and we used to go to the bars in Annapolis. If you've ever been to Annapolis, it's a really good scene there. And I was sitting at this bar with my buddy. I'm ashamed to admit that I drank too much that particular night, and I was just sitting there having a conversation, and this guy walks up to me. At the time, I had short hair. I was a baseball player. And just to put it in the context, I didn't even know the branches of the military. I didn't know the ranks. I didn't know the difference between a private first class and a major or lieutenant or anything like that. Like, honestly, the only thing I knew was I had to watch the Gulf War on CNN, you know, so I knew about stealth aircraft, and that was about Norman Schwarzkopf. That was kind of about it. And so I'm in this bar, I'm talking to this one guy, and he comes up to me and he goes, "I know who you are. You're Marine Special Forces." He literally said, like, "You're Marine Special Forces." And I had drank enough that I was like, yes, that is true. And he started asking me questions, and I started answering him questions. And for about 30 minutes, I'm just making up stories about a branch I don't even know about. By the way, I come to find out later on that it's called stolen valor, but I'm going to earn it back here in the rest of the story. So I ended up telling the story. The next day, I'm back at school, and I'm talking to a friend of mine, and I said, "Hey, I was at this thing last night. I was talking to this guy, and he started asking me about going to the Marines and stuff." And as I'm talking to this guy, he looks at me and goes, "It's crazy that you mentioned that, because I'm actually going tomorrow to talk to a Marine recruiter, because I'm going to go and be in the infantry." And I was like, "You know what? I'm going to go with you, Murph." His name was Mike Murphy. I said, "I'm going to go with you, Murph." I said, "Just for fun, just to see what this is all about." Literally, that was the conversation. So the next day, I walk into the cafeteria. Right outside the cafeteria is this Marine standing there. He's got these crazy looking blue pants on with a red stripe down the side. He's got a khaki shirt. None of this outfit matches. He has all these medals and ribbons and stuff like that. I mean, it's a very strange outfit to be wearing in the middle of a college. And I walk up to this guy who was a Marine recruiter. He was a captain. His name was Captain Timothy Florian. I still remember this dude's name because he's the one that got me in the Marine Corps. He looks at me and he goes like this. And he snaps and he points at me and he goes, "Hey, you ever want to fly airplanes?" And the moment he goes, "Hey, you ever want to fly airplanes?" like everything changed. And I went, "Yeah, actually, yeah, I have always wanted to fly airplanes." To put it into context, when I was 11 years old, my grandfather, who was a pilot at the time, a commercial pilot, took me flying in a Cessna Double Eagle, Golden Eagle. 2 engines, about six seats. And I was sitting on the right, he was sitting on the left. And as we got on the runway, he said, go and put your hands on the controls. So I put my hands on the controls. He took his hands off the controls. He put the throttles all the way up. He did the steering with his feet. And he said, now when I tell you to, I just want you to pull back. And about 150 knots, we started pulling the yoke back. And literally, I took an airplane off into the sky for the very first time when I was 11. And the moment that the wheels left the runway at Mesa Airport in Phoenix, I was hooked. I was like, dude, this is something I want to do for the rest of my life. And so when Captain Florian went like this and said, hey, you ever want to fly airplanes? I was like, yes, I've always wanted to fly airplanes. And he said, listen, there's a program in the Marine Corps called PLC where I can guarantee if you pass certain tests, I can guarantee that I can get you into flight school. I can't get you guaranteed into airplanes or fixed wing or rotary wing. All I can do is guarantee that I can get you into flight school. You're on your own at that point, but if I can get you in that program, would you be interested in going to the Marine Corps? And I kid you not, dude, 2 weeks later, I'm like signing on the dotted line, having passed on my tests. I go back for Thanksgiving, talk to my family. Keep in mind, my family doesn't know anything about the military. The only person who had ever been in the military in my family was my grandfather and my great uncle. My great uncle George was a pilot in World War II. He took off in 1942 in North Africa, and no one ever saw him ever again. The assumption is he crashed his airplane in 1942. So the only person in my family is my grandmother sitting at the table whose brother had died in war. And I'm breaking it to my family over Thanksgiving dinner that I'm about to go in the military, and they were not happy. At my commissioning service about a year later, my grandmother and my mom are sitting in the front row weeping. The gunnery sergeant who gave me my first salute said, isn't that wonderful, son? There's tears of joy. Those tears of joy. I said, Gunny, those are not tears. Those are my mom and my grandma think I'm about to die. And that was literally my first entrance in the Marine Corps. And it all started with a story back in Annapolis that wasn't true. So the next step, right, you go into OCS. Now in the PLC program, Platoon Leader Corps program, you actually go to boot camp in the summer between your junior and senior year. So I did 10 weeks in Quantico in the summer of my senior year. Now to put this into context, remember I told you like it was kind of a whim that I joined the Marine Corps, and I kind of got into it. Like by the time I showed up at boot camp, I was running about an 18-minute 3-mile, which is like pretty good shape. I didn't know how that was at the time. I just knew that was like the max in our PFT. And so I was ready for boot camp. When I showed up there, what I was not ready for was like, you know, from being in boot camp, especially in the Marine Corps, there's like this moment, I can't remember about day 2, you need to do all the in processing and stuff, but like right around day 2, the moment your commanding officer says, carry out the plan of the day, you start getting yelled at. And the moment I started getting yelled at, I was like, man, I don't know what I just signed myself up for. I mean, I watched Full Metal Jacket. I guess I should have known a little bit about what Marine Corps boot camp was all about, but it was a shock to my system. And in this moment, I realized I wasn't even sure I wanted to be in the Marines. Like all my buddies went back to their homes in, Cape Cod, and they went back to their homes in Philly, to the Jersey Shore. Dudes went back to the coastal shore of Maryland. Everybody was on the beach drinking beer, like having fun. And here I am, for some reason, in the middle of Marine Corps boot camp in Quantico, Virginia, which is about 112 degrees in humidity in the summer, and I'm sitting here getting yelled at. And so the moment that I start getting yelled at, I remember a conversation I had the day before. I was sitting ready to go into the chow hall, and the guy standing next to me, we're just telling each other stories. And I said, well, how did you get here? And he goes, actually, I applied a year ago and I got in, and I came here last summer, but on the second day I slipped and I broke my toe. And so I got medically out processed, but I'm back. So he's telling me the story about how like in the second day he broke his toe and he had to leave like for medical reasons, but now he was back. And the night after I meet my drill instructor, that story comes popping back into my head. And I remember my buddy who I was talking to who broke his toe and he got out of boot camp. And I thought, man, if I could just break my toe, like I could leave, but it's not like I'm quitting. It's like anyone would know I was quitting. They would just think, oh, too bad, like he broke his toe. What I'm about to tell you is literally down to the moment, the story that happened that particular night. If you're familiar with Marine Corps squad bay, you got your whole squad bay, and then you kind of have this area where you go into the bathroom and there's like stalls and urinals, and then there's a big communal shower thing where like you take a shower. And I remember that night, it was about 10 o'clock at night, 2200 Marine time. I was standing in the shower, and I looked at the wall, and I looked at my foot. And I remember thinking, if I kick this wall as hard as I can, I will break my toe, and it will hurt like hell. But I will get the summer off. Like, I'm thinking about this. I can earn back 10 weeks of my life if all I did is have the courage to break my toe. And I sat there, man, I'm looking at that wall, and I sat there thinking about it. And I sat there for about 4 minutes, looking at the wall, looking at my toe, looking at the wall, looking at my toe, trying to get the courage up to kick the wall as hard as I can. And I thought, in that moment, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just do this tomorrow, because I could always break my toe tomorrow. But what I can't always do is do day 3 of Marine Corps boot camp. And literally, I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, went right to PT, did my pull-ups, did sit-ups, went back into the classroom, had chow that day, did all the marching drills and everything in the hot, sweltering sun. And that third night, I sat next to the wall in the shower stall, looking at my toe, looking at the wall, looking at my toe, looking at the wall. And I'm like, man, I'm going to do it this time. I'm going to kick the wall as hard as I can. And I thought, you can kick the wall anytime, but what you can't do anytime is do day 4 of Marine Corps boot camp. And every night, for the next week, I kind of looked at the wall and looked at my toe a little bit less until finally it went away. Next thing you know, 10 weeks later, I'm graduating, not just graduating from boot camp, I'm literally graduating like first in my class, which is kind of a surprise for a guy who's going to kick the wall. And the reason I tell that story is because there's always moments in life where you find yourself in a situation, you're like, how did I get here? Like if you're like trying out a new workout program, or maybe you just joined a jiu-jitsu school. Maybe you're like trying a new job, or you're trying like a new entrepreneurial venture or whatever, or a new relationship. There's always this like a very uncomfortable moment in the beginning of almost everything, where you're kind of like, wait a second, what did I just get myself into? Like starting a business, or writing a book, or trying to do an event, or sharing a message, or starting a show like the kind of show that you have with like so many listeners and viewers. Every time you get ready to start something, there's this moment after the honeymoon ends where you're like, wait a second, what did I do? Well, like, why did I get myself into this? And I was thinking about that moment where I was thinking about breaking my toe against the wall, because you're like, any day, you can quit any time. Like, honestly, you can quit any time. What you can't do is get to day 4 of your new entrepreneurial venture, or whatever it is that you're going to do. And I remember that. I think sometimes, like, I look at the trajectory of life and I wonder what would happen. You know what I'm saying? Like, I ended up going on the Marine Corps, ended up being a fighter pilot, going on the Top Gun, and all those great things. So I wonder what would have happened to my life. I think I would be a completely different person, actually, if I had actually taken that easy road out, and I'm glad I didn't. By the way, I only have good memories of Marine Corps OCS. I feel like mentally I've kind of forgotten all those hard times, which is most of it. I remember one night waking up. So you basically wake up at 5 every morning. I think that's pretty common. It's a violent wake up for anybody who's ever been in the Marine Corps boot camp. You're like having a wonderful dream. Next thing you know, someone is pounding on the side of a trash can, screaming obscenities, or close to obscenities, I guess they do now. So on about 8 weeks into OCS, into boot camp, things are going well. I'm starting to feel my stride, had some leadership positions. Things are going pretty well. And then I woke up with my toenails painted red. Now, I don't know if you've ever had that experience before, but when you go to sleep, your toenails are normal color. When you wake up, your toenails are painted red. Now, sometime in the middle of the night, one of my buddies had gone through the squad bay. I don't know how he got toenail polish, but he literally painted everybody. About 10 people down the road. And when you fall out, so for those of you who have been in the Marines, you know how this works. But if you don't, the way it works is you get woken up and you have about 3 seconds literally to get from your rack down in front of your rack and to stand in a row. And the first thing they do is ask you to count off. You turn your head to the right. The dude goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you are standing barefoot right in front of this sergeant instructor. And you want to see someone who loses their mind. You want to see a drill instructor who just found out that 10 of his recruits are standing there with their toenails painted. Never found out who did it. Still to this day, a mystery. I think one day we'll probably find out at some kind of reunion or something like that. But see it? Yeah, he saw everybody's toes. So it's like 10 people in a row. I just figure in the night, like he just basically went around, because everybody's sleeping kind of with their feet out of the sheets or whatever. Like, I don't know how you slept. I never got underneath my sheets, right? Because you got to make your rack in the morning. It was just easier to sleep on top and like to just jump right back out. So yeah, he painted everybody. What was the DI response? He went crazy. Yeah, he started calling us all kinds of things that I can't say because of political correctness.
Wow. What did it feel like graduating OCS?
Yeah, so first of all, I graduated OCS about 30 pounds lighter than I joined OCS. I don't know about, everybody's got a picture right out of boot camp. I think I was like 167 pounds. By the way, when I do nowadays, like if I do like a DEXA scan and it gives me a like lean, it gives you your lean body mass, it's about 167 pounds. So I don't know, I was about 3% body fat when I graduated from OCS, and it was awesome. But I will tell you one thing that made a big difference for me. I was a very individualistic person. I was a baseball player. I grew up in this championship family. And when I joined the Marine Corps, I was like, I'm going to join the Marines, but I'm not going to like buy into all this whole like hoorah, semper fi sort of like, devil dog stuff. I'm going to do me. I'm going to do me. And if anybody's had a boot camp experience, the idea of you doing you kind of expires at about the 2-week mark in boot camp. And I'll never forget this moment. Like, for those of you who've been in boot camp, especially in the Marines, like close order drill marching is kind of a big deal. For those of you who've never done that before, close order drill is basically 3 rows of 12 people with a guide-on leader up front, and usually like a platoon leader giving out commands. And you're going to march, you're going to angle to the left, you're going to do column right. You do a lot of different stop, turn, about face. You do a lot of different commands. And the idea is that 36 Marines, or I should say like 37 Marines, all essentially move as one. If you've ever seen a boot camp platoon in like the first week, they don't move as one, they move like 36 sort of individuals. Heads bobbing all over the place, people kind of marching to the left. But if you've seen a boot camp platoon at week like 13, Paris Island or San Diego, or week 10 at OCS, you see people acting as one. I remember thinking when I was doing close order drill, I remember thinking like, I'm not going to really like get into this. I'm going to do it because they told me to do it, but I'm not going to really like buy into it. And I never forget about the second week in boot camp. I'm like in the first squad about 8 deep. So I'm just kind of one of the people. And I remember all of a sudden feeling the sense that our platoon had just come, like you could see everyone was like, poof, 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 and everyone was moving. Like, have you ever seen those birds? They're all flying in this direction, and they just all naturally fly in the opposite direction. There's something very powerful about that. And I remember sitting, I get getting goosebumps just thinking about it. I remember sitting like 8 deep, and all of a sudden there was like a oneness about that platoon, and I was like, all right, I could really get into this. And that was like the moment, I think that was the moment I became a Marine. Officially, I became a Marine the moment I got commissioned, which is after that. But I feel like right in that moment, I'm like, okay. And there was like a buy-in. All right, I got esprit de corps. I'm going to do this whole like semper fi, do or die, devil dog thing. And it was like that moment that all that stuff came together. It's pretty sweet. All right, so the process from here on out, every Marine is a rifleman, right? So actually out of boot camp, I went back to college after boot camp. I got commissioned basically when I graduated. And then I went right into something called the basic school. The basic school is the Marine Corps version of infantry school. Every Marine officer, doesn't matter who they are, gets 6 months of infantry training, all the weapons. The idea is that by the time you leave the basic school, by the way, clever name, I know only the Marine Corps could come up with a really clever name like the basic school. It took them all of about 3 seconds. I don't know, what should we call this? What are we going to teach them? Basic things. What do we call it? The basic school. It's like the Marine Corps' naming system is just, like it could have named it anything except for the basic school. And that's what they call it for 6 months. You're basically in Quantico. And what they're teaching you essentially by the time you leave is you're qualified to be a platoon commander on the ground for an infantry platoon. And it's interesting, no matter where people go, artillery, tanks, aviation, supply, there's always moments, especially in war, where you'll find like a forward air controller who's an F-18 pilot calling in air, and next thing you know, the platoon commander's gone or the company commander's gone. That person jumps right in and starts filling the role of company commander. And it's fascinating. We're the only service in the world that does that. Like if you go in the Navy, they're going to train you as a submariner or a pilot or a person that works on a flight deck. If you go into the Air Force, they're going to train you in your aircraft. You go in the Army, you're going to get trained in whatever your skill is. The Marine Corps is the only service that trains literally everyone from the beginning as a rifleman or a platoon commander. And it's very powerful because when we get into war, our pilots, not only do we know the scheme of maneuver, but sometimes we even know that guy. Like literally, there's times when I was flying missions where I knew personally the person who was talking to me on the radio on the other side, and that's pretty powerful. So I did that basic school. So I graduated first in the basic school, which is our form of infantry training. I think I was first in my platoon, third in the entire company. Then I went into flight school. And by the way, you go from Marine Corps infantry training, where, just to put it in context, like my hair, as short as it is right now, is 3 times longer than the regulation that they have in like officer training. I'm serious. You look like a Marine. And I went from that to the Navy's flight training in Pensacola. You want to talk about like 2 different worlds, okay? You got like the middle of Virginia, which is not a very fun place to be, to Pensacola, Florida, which is about as fun as it gets. You have the Marine Corps and all the discipline and the rules and checking in and duty and stuff like that. And you go to the Navy where you have none of that stuff. And I basically spent 3 years as a Marine in the Navy learning how to fly airplanes. The way it works in flight training is you do ground school first. It's about 6 weeks, learning all about weather and physics and the systems and engines and that sort of thing. Then you go into what's called primary flight training. Primary is you in a T-34 with an instructor in your back seat. It's basically you trying to kill yourself for about 3 months with somebody in your backseat trying to keep from being killed. And the best way I can describe primary flight training for anybody who flies in the Navy, nowadays it's T6s, but when I was flying it was T-34Cs, is it works like this. The teaching methodology, which by the way is the same teaching methodology I use today when I teach, is teach, demonstrate, do. And that's basically the way that they do everything. The best way I can define this is I would sit in a room with my instructor. My instructor would draw the landing pattern on the board and say, hey, you're going to take off, you're going to put your gear and flaps up, you're going to turn left, you're going to climb up to 1,200 feet, you're going to go down to what's called base, you're going to slow down to 120 knots, you're going to put your gear and flaps down, flaps to half, you're going to turn 45 degrees, you're going to come to this point at 700 feet, this point at 500 feet, this point at 300 feet. When you get to final, you're going to put your flaps down full, finish your landing checklist, and here's how you flare to land. And literally, he would walk through that in a teaching environment for like 30 minutes. And then he would ask me a question. My call sign was head, so he would go, hey, you got that, head? And I would lie for the first time that day. I was like, yes, sir, got it. I had no idea what he's talking about. Like, he's talking about circles and airspeeds and stuff. I've never done this before. He's literally teaching it to me, but never done it before. Second stage is demonstrate. So what happens is the instructor actually sits in the front seat, you sit in the back seat, and he'll fly, or she'll fly like the whole landing pattern, and you just ride the controls. You hold on loosely to the controls, and you kind of feel what they're doing. They'll land, they'll do like 2 times, they'll land, and then they'll go, all right, there's your demonstration. Any questions? No, sir, no questions. You got it? Yeah, I got it. I lied for the second time. That's 2 lies this day. And then what you do is switch seats. You sit in the front, they sit in the back, and then you go do your first landing pattern. So the first time I ever landed an airplane, it's a true story, I landed on the runway, a little rough, but sufficient to get the airplane on the runway. Now, in airplanes, in a car, you drive with your hands. In airplanes, you drive with your feet. So the stick moves the ailerons, which banks the aircraft, or it moves the elevators, which puts the airplane's nose up and down. When you are on the ground, this does nothing. All it does is move the control surfaces on the wings. It does not move the nose or the rudder in the back. What moves the rudder in the back and the nose is your feet. So if you want to move right, you put your foot to the right. If you want to go left, you put your foot to the left. That's the way it works in an airplane. Well, that's not normal because I would learn my whole life, if I want to go right, I turn this way or I move the stick this way. And so I landed, as soon as I landed the airplane for the very first time, my airplane moved to the right. It moved about 30 degrees to the right. The runway is about 8,000 feet this way and about 200 feet this way. And the airplane began to veer to the right. So as I'm moving to the right, I do what every normal person would do, which is I try to turn with my hands back to the left, which mind you, doesn't do anything. I'm pushing as hard as I can to get this airplane to move to the left. Meanwhile, we're literally driving directly towards the sign on the side of the runway. If you've ever been on a runway before, looked outside, there's all kinds of signs down the side of the runway. Angle taxiways, speed, end of runway markers, all kinds of stuff there. And I'm literally driving right towards the sign. My instructor so calmly in the back says, steer with your feet. Steer with your feet. Steer with your feet, steer with your feet, steer with your feet, steer with your feet. And just before we hit this sign, I felt the controls come out of my hand. I felt the instructor boot a full left rudder, full throttle, and literally took the airplane off just before we hit this sign on the side of the runway. And I was very thankful to have that instructor in my back seat to make sure that I didn't die. And that was like literally my first landing. And no joke, man, 3-4 days later, I mean, it's so fast. 3 or 4 days later, I'm soloing by myself a T-34. 12 hours in the airplane, the instructor hops out and says, all right, you got it. They tap the back seat and make sure that it's safe, and you go off and fly on your own. And it's unbelievable to think, I always tell this story because I think it's amazing what the military can do in such a short period of time. It takes civilian training a long time till someone can be out there on their own, talking on the radio, landing, taking off, doing full aerobatics, upside down, loops, rolls, in literally just a few days. And it's amazing what you can do in such a short period of time with expectations. They literally expect you to learn that quickly. My first flight, I almost killed myself and my instructor a couple times. I almost threw up on the first flight. I got so airsick, and literally just several flights later, I'm soloing in an airplane. It's just a testament to like the military's ability to train people fast, and they will take anybody. Rocket science engineer all the way down to a dude like me who failed kindergarten and take you right through flight school. So the way that flight selection works, in the Navy and the Marine Corps, there's ground school I told you about, there's primary flight training, which I just talked about. Then there's intermediate, which I did intermediate, which is flying a jet, not a full-on jet, like a T2 is what I flew during that time. Then there's advanced training. Advanced for me was A4s. We don't fly A4s anymore. I was literally flying like like Vietnam vintage A4s. What happens at the end of your flight school, when you get your wings, so at the point at which you get your wings and you graduate from flight school, you choose two things, coast and craft. And the way coast and craft works is you have East Coast squadrons and West Coast squadrons. We have some that are overseas, but primarily it's West and East Coast. And in the Marine Corps, at the time I was flying, we had on the jet side, we had F-18s, AV-8s, which is the Harrier, and EA-6s, which is the Prowler. Pretty much, not everybody, but pretty much everybody wanted the Hornet, which is the F-18. That's what I ended up flying. The Hornet is the most versatile of all the aircraft. It does air-to-air, it does air-to-ground. It's definitely the fastest, sort of Mach 1.8 up to Mach 2.0. And I think it's probably the most proliferated and most versatile, and we land on aircraft carriers. And so pretty much everyone wanted F-18s, and everyone wanted F-18s West Coast, because that means that you get stationed at San Diego, at Miramar, which is awesome. And here's the way it worked. The number one dude in the class always gets what he or she wants, right? So as long as you graduate number one, you will get wherever you want, whatever craft you want, and whatever coast you want. As they move down with sort of a little bit of rank choice, the methodology or the phraseology that Marines are taught from day one is needs of the Marine Corps. So as you move down, they will literally put everybody, if they need 10 Prowler pilots and there's 11 people graduating, the first person will get whatever they want and everyone else will get Prowlers. If there's 10 Harrier spots, 11, one Hornet spot, the first person will get what they want, everyone else will get the needs of the Marine Corps. And so I was blessed to be able to graduate first. So graduate first in my advance, and I literally asked for F-18s on the West Coast, and next thing you know, I'm on my way to San Diego to fly F-18s. I will say parenthetically, having graduated at the top of my class so often, I had developed a little bit of a hubris. I think the best way to call this is a little cockiness. If you've ever seen Maverick in Top Gun, that was kind of a good example of what it was. But moving into my first squadron as a brand new pilot, I'm about to learn how good I wasn't. So I did really well in flight school, but showed up a little too cocky, and I was about to learn my lesson. So I showed up at VMFA 242. That's the BATS. That was our squadron here on the West Coast. And when you show up at a new squadron, I think it's kind of true for everyone across pretty much all the services. I mean, I like I just said, I showed up thinking I was the world's greatest pilot. Like, have you ever seen Top Gun? You got a pilot like Maverick who's pretty cocky about himself. Pilots aren't normally like that. So what you saw with Maverick is like, that guy would be dead. So pilots who think and act like that kill themselves very quickly. But I was pretty cocky when I first showed up. And the way it works when you join a squadron is a fighter squadron is you have a rank structure, right? Every squadron has a rank structure. The person who's in charge of a flight squadron is a lieutenant colonel. Normally, that's a commanding officer, the executive officer, the next person in charge is normally a lieutenant colonel as well. Then you have a bunch of department heads. You've got training, you've got operations, you have maintenance, you have safety. Those are all majors. Typically, those are all majors. Everybody else is a captain or first lieutenant. I was just joining as a very young captain, or just having come out of being a first lieutenant. So there's a rank structure. And on that rank structure, I was basically at the bottom. But every fighter squadron, these are dudes who actually fly airplanes. There's a completely separate structure of ranking. There's 18 pilots in every squadron. And the way it typically works is everyone knows who the best pilot is. Everybody knows. See, we go out and dogfight each other. And when we dogfight, it's like 1 against 1, best pilot wins. So we'll do full up maneuvering, and basically whoever's behind at the end is the guy shooting the one in front, and that means that you won. And everybody knows who the best pilot is because we all fight against each other, and everybody knows kind of where they are in the pecking order of the squadron. There was a guy in my squadron who was the executive officer. Actually, he was the number 2 on the rank structure, but he was the best pilot. His call sign was Snake, which I don't even know how somebody gets a call sign like that, but his name was Snake Dalton. And Snake was literally one of the best pilots I ever saw. And I would go out and dogfight. Like, as a young pilot, you would just go out and fight against these guys to sort of like mano a mano to see who was better. That's how we trained. And I would get beat, dude. I would get beat every single time. I'd fly against Snake. I'd fly against the 3rd person. I'd fly against the 10th person, fly against the 12th person. Keep in mind, there's no listing anywhere of this. It's not on the whiteboard anywhere. You just know who's best, who's second, who's third, who's 10th. And I'm telling you, I got beat by everybody. I was 18th by a long shot. Like, I was the worst pilot in the squadron, and I was getting beat by everybody. And just so you know what getting beat like in an F-18 feels like. When you're flying an F-18, you're looking out of the front of your windscreen. Ideally, you're looking at the airplane out of the front of your windscreen. If you're neutral in an F-18, you're looking sideways, literally like 90 degrees off. If you're losing or you're defensive, you're looking completely behind you. Now, keep in mind, you're pulling like 4, 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8 Gs in an airplane. You're maneuvering full up, like pointing your nose at the ground, pulling 8 Gs, trying to maneuver. And the more defensive you get, the more you have to look over your shoulder. It's hard enough to fly an F-18 and pull all those Gs when you're looking right out of the windscreen. It's nearly impossible, like when you're looking behind you. And I think like some of my neck injuries came from like me looking behind me at Snake Dalton trying to shoot me. So I was the worst. I was the worst, dude. And it was embarrassing. Like you come out of flight school, you come out at the top of the heap, you know, and you realize you were like this big fish in this little pond, you know, thinking that you were something special. And I move into this place where I'm the worst and I am just getting smashed every single time. And there comes a moment in your life, and I feel like everybody experiences at one point in your life where you think like, maybe I got past, like maybe I don't belong here. Like maybe I was good here, but I don't know, maybe I'll never be good here. And I remember thinking like, something's got to give, because I'm not going to spend the rest of my Marine Corps career getting shot from behind by somebody in my squadron. And so I just decided like, I've done this before. I know how to drill it. I was a Division I baseball player. I know how to go from bad to good. And I'm like, this is going to change now. And so the way that I fix this is I straight up drilled it. By the way, I speak around the world professionally to really big audiences. And when I first started speaking, I had a coach. And I started teaching on discipline and drilling and practicing and getting better. And my speaker coach at the time said, don't use that word discipline because, you know, people don't like that word discipline. And I was like, look, Tom, like to be fair, I'm going to use it because it's what happens in real life if you want to get better. And I tell you what, that was 20 years ago. I still to this day am using that word training and discipline. And here's why. I decided I was going to get better. And here's how I did it. There is a simulator building in Miramar where I was at. There's about 8 simulators, flight simulators, so computerized flight simulators. The way this simulator building works is it's open from 9 in the morning to about 9 at night, all day long. And they've got training flights that you get scheduled for, but if you want to get in and practice, there's little openings here and there where you can get in and do your own practice. The problem with that is the openings are on a rank basis, right? So if you're a major, you can get in anytime you want to, but if you're like a lowly first lieutenant, almost captain like me, like it's really hard to get in there because it's all based on rank. And so I would go over there, but there was like too long of a line or people were waiting. I could never get into the simulators, could never practice. However, there was a window every Friday night. You see it about 5 o'clock on Friday night to about 9 o'clock. The simulator building was still open, but if you know anything about Marine Corps squadrons, or for that matter, Marine Corps bases, you know, basically everybody on Friday night is over at the club. And so the simulator building from 5 to 9, pretty much every Friday night was completely wide open. And I would go in there on Friday nights. The first thing I would do is sit in the cockpit and I would close my eyes. The F-18 control stick has about 6 different switches, depending on where your fingers are. The throttle of the F-18 has a switch literally for every finger and about 6 different switches for your thumb. And understanding how to use and maneuver the flight and weapon systems with your fingers is actually very important. And so I'd close my eyes and be able to start to do that, not without even looking or without even trying to identify where those things were. And I would memorize the location of all the switches and certainly the weapon systems that I need to. I would literally picture it in my mind and I would be able to find those things instantaneously. And the reason why is really simple. In a dogfight with an F-18, the way that it typically works is an F-18 or a similar airplane can typically turn 180 degrees in about 3 seconds. That's a massive bat turn. That's a huge amount of G's. But if you are able to turn 180 degrees in 3 seconds, you can ideally gain an advantage. And the best way that I can define this is if 2 airplanes are coming after each other and they both pass like this. This is fully neutral. In other words, neither airplane in this particular case has an advantage. But if this airplane's behind this airplane, now this airplane has an advantage. And the difference between this and this is 180 degrees. So if we pass each other, this airplane turns, this airplane goes straight, this airplane goes 180 degrees, that's winning, right? So if I could get my opponent to go straight for 3 seconds, and I can turn in 3 seconds, I'll win every time. Now, as you can imagine, your opponent rarely goes straight for 3 seconds. They typically turn too. So what that means when you're in a dogfight is if you can make 3 decisions 1 second faster, you'll gain 180 degrees and win. But that doesn't often happen because you're kind of fighting inside of like milliseconds. So I just knew if I could make like 6 decisions half a second faster, I'd win. That's kind of how I did the math. And literally, I started training myself to make 6 decisions a half second faster. Dogfighting is like a chess match. You're thinking about one move against another move against another move. But while you're doing that, you're trying to minimize as much resistance and distraction as you can. Let me give you an example. The F-18, the perfect turn of an F-18 is right in between about 305 knots and 315 knots. It's in that window right in there. It's actually an exact airspeed as you're flying that if you fly too fast, you'll actually arc your turn and you'll actually give maneuvering room for your enemy. And if you fly too slow, you'll actually bleed off so much airspeed that you can't actually turn effectively at all. So there's like this perfect window of flying a perfect turn. And as I'm in the simulator, I'm actually literally flying, okay, right there, right on the number, perfect turn, feeling what that feels like to kind of the resistance of the stick. Because what I want to be able to do is fly that perfect turn while looking over my shoulder at my adversary. And I went into that simulator and I drilled and I practiced and I drilled and I practiced and I drilled and I practiced and I drilled and I practiced. And about 3 years later, almost to the day, not only am I not the worst person in my squadron, but I'm actually the #1 instructor in the entire Marine Corps for 1-against-1 dogfighting. And it just goes to show the power of like, I'm a kindergarten failure, right? So it's not like I had the intellectual skills to be able to do anything other than to get into the Marine Corps. But it just shows the power of practice and drill and practice and drill and practice and drill. And I learned it from my parents. Like I told the story back in the early part of the show. I watched my mom teach some somewhat average basketball players become champion basketball players because they had perfect drilling practice. I watched my dad teach some of the best referees in the world how to get on the court, how to look good, how to get into position, how to call block charge when 2 7-feet people smash into each other based on drilling and practice, right? So when I teach entrepreneurs, business owners, people who want to change the world, the most important thing that I can teach them is the importance of finding the right groove and finding what's right and then just getting better at it all the time. We have this idea in the world. It was given to us by the movies. Like if you watch Top Gun, the first Top Gun, Maverick has this magic move. If I'm going to put on the brakes, he'll fly right by. And we have an idea that if I could just find a magic, if I could just take the right supplement, or if I could just find the right fitness program, or if I could find the right, internet marketing strategy or whatever, it's going to change everything. We have this idea that there's a magic move. What really is the magic move is executing what works with training and discipline. And if you can do that, you'll win every time. All right, so I had an opportunity to fly against a MiG-29. To put this into context, when we train in the F-18, we're always training to pretend like we're flying against a MiG-29. So in all those dogfights that I just told you about, me against the adversary, I'm actually pretending he's a MiG-29 as I'm fighting against him, because the MiG-29 isn't the most proliferated airplane, but of the 4th generation aircraft, which is what we train against, it's the most airplanes that are out there. Now, there's a little problem here because, if you want to train against a MiG-29, the only people who own MiG-29s are Russia. We don't train against Russia. China has a version of a MiG-29. Iran, Syria, those countries that are not our friends. And so we typically don't train against, Iran. But there's one squadron in Germany that used to be East German. And when East Germany just became Germany, that squadron moved over. And so there's 12 MiG-29s that are actually allied MiG-29s. And so we got to fly with them and actually against them. By the way, I know very few pilots who ever flew against a MiG-29. There were only 3 in my squadron that got to do it. We had 18 pilots. And in the context of this story, at this moment, I'm still one of the worst guys in my squadron. Remember I told you, eventually I went on to be one of the best. But in this context, I was actually one of the worst. The junior person in the squadron, depending on who the commanding officer is, but typically the junior person in the squadron is in charge of being around the commanding officer in case he needs help. And in my case, my commanding officer, we were in Las Vegas at the time. I don't know if you've ever been to Las Vegas, but there's a lot of bars in Las Vegas. And my commanding officer loved to drink. And so since I was a junior person in the squadron, I was attached to my CO so that I could make sure he got home at night. And one night we're sitting in a bar, someplace downtown Las Vegas. I'm sipping, sparkling water. And he's on his 25th bourbon and Coke or whatever he was on that night. And he looks over at me, slurring his words. And he said, "Head, tomorrow, you're going to fight a MiG-29. And I was like, "Hey, that sounds good to me." But I said, "Skipper, just so that I can hear it one more time, I wanted him to repeat it so that he could remember it." I said, "Could you just repeat that?" He said, "Tomorrow, you're going to fight against a MiG-29. True to his word, the next day I got to the squadron and on the flight schedule, there's me. By the way, the 3 people who got to fight were my commanding officer fought one, my training officer, who was on the higher echelons of who's good, and me, worst dude in my squadron. To put this story into context, the person I was fighting against was the commanding officer of the MiG-29 squadron. This dude had 20 years of experience flying his airplane. I had about 6 months of experience flying mine. I already told you I was the worst pilot of my squadron. To put it even more into context, the airplane he was flying, I hate to admit this, but at the time was a superior airplane. The MiG-29 had better turn rate performance. In other words, it could turn faster than the F-18. And the MiG-29 had, at the time, a helmet-mounted cueing system, so they could shoot their missiles at up to 90 degrees off. So the pilot can look with his helmet, cue the reticle of the infrared missile, and shoot up to 90 degrees off. At the time, the F-18 did not have that system. We do now, but we didn't have the ability to shoot anything other than forward quarter infrared missiles. And so you got the senior instructor against the junior instructor. You got a better turning airplane against the worst turning airplane, and a better missile system against an inferior missile system. The only thing I had going for me that day is, number one, the F-18 is actually a little bit better in a slow speed turning engagement. And the real thing I had going for me that day is I was young and dumb and inexperienced, but I didn't know I was supposed to lose. You know, sometimes that just makes all the difference. And so I went to fight this MiG-29. The typical way we do it when we do a dogfight is two airplanes about 3 miles apart. We separate, accelerate to about 450 miles an hour, turn in. We'll typically pass each other at about 500 miles an hour. That's 500 miles an hour here, 500 here. That's about 1,000 miles an hour worth of closure, to put it into context. And about 500 feet. We try to get it as tight as we can inside of a safety bubble, or just outside of a safety bubble. And it's close enough probably if we had our visors up to see the whites of our eyes. And typically in a dogfight, we start the actual maneuvering here. Everything up to here is set up. Right about the time we pass, the lead pilot, which in this case is the MiG-29, will call over the radio, "Fights on." The junior pilot, which is me, will call "Fights on," and we will start to fight. And so in this particular case, we passed. He rolls wings level. I roll wings level. We both pull directly into the vertical. MiG-29 pulls about 8 Gs. I pull about 8 Gs. We're just pulling for our life, literally, to try to get in, see who can get inside of each other. Basically, in this fight, whoever pulls hardest without over-G'ing their airplane is going to win this first turn. And as we're starting to come up, 8 Gs, to put it into context, is right now, like if you're sitting in a room or you're like working out or in your car, you're experiencing 1 G. So if you are 150 pounds, you weigh 150 pounds. If you are 200 pounds, you weigh 200 pounds. Under 8 Gs, however, a 200-pound person now weighs 1,600 pounds. Your head literally weighs more than your entire body, just to put it into context. What happens is the blood begins to pool in your lower extremities. If you remember in the second Maverick movie, the second Top Gun movie, Top Gun Maverick, when that dude passed out, that's because the blood rushed out of his head and the brain has an on-off switch, and the brain decides, if I'm not getting oxygen, I'm going to turn off. And so pilots train themselves. We have a G suit, but we also train ourselves to push, literally push the blood back up into our upper extremities. You're doing this while fighting a MiG-29. So pulling 8 Gs, using a maneuver to push your blood back into your upper extremities. And as we're pulling as tight as we can, we literally pass each other completely neutral. Now, I shouldn't have even gotten that far. He should have been able to get inside of me. He just didn't. For whatever reason, we passed exactly neutral. I've basically, in my mind, won, not because I'm beating him, but because, like, if I just turn one turn neutral against a MiG-29, I feel like I've accomplished something, and I have. And as soon as we pass each other, he immediately goes nose low. Now, it's hard to explain how much of an advantage this gave me, but remember when I said the F-18 has a better slow speed maneuvering system? If an airplane goes nose low, it opens up about a 2-second window. And in that 2-second window, the F-18 has a maneuver called a pirouette, which if you can execute this maneuver flawlessly, you'll win every time. The way a pirouette works is it goes like this. You pull your nose aggressively up, bleed as much airspeed off as you can. You push the stick and the rudder as far to the left as you can, literally plow it right into the left side of the airplane. And what happens is the airplane, if this is the airplane right here, it turns exactly 180 degrees. You have to have your nose up. You have to have gravity working for you. You have to have all those systems working for you, but you can literally turn an airplane inside of 2 seconds, 180 degrees in exactly this flight regime. I remember my instructor's voice, because we had been taught to fly against MiG-29s over and over and over again. I remember my instructor saying, "Head, if you ever find yourself with a MiG-29 going nose low at a slow speed merge, pull your nose up, pirouette to the left, take an aim 9 shot." Just to repeat that, he said, if you ever find yourself in a situation where a MiG-29 goes nose low at a slow speed merge, pull your nose up, pirouette to the left, take an aim 9 shot. And so I've got 2 seconds, basically 2 seconds to make my decision and to execute my maneuver. And I was asked people, like, when I'm telling the story, like, especially with large groups, I said, "What do you think I did?" The groups always go, "Well, you pull your nose up, pirouette. I did exactly like what my instructor did. I didn't think about it. I honestly, I didn't think about it. I didn't put together a focus group. I didn't ask anyone like in my squadron. I literally, like almost out of rote memory, because I had trained and practiced this, I literally pull my nose up, start to bleed off airspeed, left rudder, left aileron, full stick, right down. The next thing you know, I'm pointing directly at the ground and a MiG-29 comes into my HUD. That's in my heads-up display. That's basically the front of my airplane. It also has the recording device, which is important to the story, because all of a sudden, instead of seeing sky, there's a MiG-29 literally right in my gun reticle. So I take an AIM-9 shot, which is an infrared missile. Literally, you lock on the system, you get a tone, you take a shot. By the way, these are all simulated missiles because we shoot simulated missiles in training, because it would be bad for morale if we didn't, if we shot the real missiles. But I shoot the AIM-9 and then I close down for a gunshot. And just to put this in context, the gun means you really won. Like if you're getting close enough to do old World War II style and to be putting bullets into the back of a MiG-29, you totally won. Okay, so all this is being recorded on my HUD tape. And as I won, we sort of came back and then we flew back into Nellis and landed. And I come back into my squadron. There's 18 pilots sitting there. And the first question I get asked as I come in with my tape is, how did you do? And I just say, like, everyone was expecting me to get beat pretty bad. I mean, I was like the worst pilot in the squadron, right? And so all I did was I put the tape in and I queued it up to the beginning of the fight, and then I just backed off. And the other 17 pilots kind of came around the TV, and they saw us come in, they saw us pass each other, they saw us go nose high, they saw us pass each other again, they saw the back fin of the MiG-29 started to turn, they saw my nose pull up, and they saw me pirouette, and all of a sudden, my 17 pilot friends see a MiG-29 in the center of my HUD, just watching all their reactions. And then they see me close down for the gunshot, and as I start pulling the trigger, on these BBs that are coming out, these 20 millimeter rounds that are coming out against this thing, my training officer, the person who was like up the ladder and one of the best pilots in my squadron, literally turns around and goes, "Dude, you're a hero." That's what he said. He said, "Dude, you're a hero." And I can confidently tell you, I did not know the hero rules. The hero rules go like this. If someone says you're a hero, you're supposed to deny it and then say the following words: I only did what anyone would have done in my situation. Like, for example, sometimes you'll see like a guy pushes someone out of the way, you know, when the bus is about to hit them and the news comes and they're like, "You saved that person's life. People are saying you're a hero. You know, what do you have to say?" And the person goes, "I'm not a hero. I only did what anyone would have done in that situation." Like when Sully, remember that pilot Sully landed that US Air airplane on the Hudson River, 155 people lived. They all came out of the airplane and they all lived. The news was like, "Sully, people are saying you're a hero." And Sully's like, "You know, I'm no hero. I only did what anyone would have done in that situation." By the way, a side point, everyone would have crashed the airplane, you know? So like, it's amazing what that guy did. But the problem was I was too young to know the hero rule, you know, that you're supposed to deny it. So when my training officer was like, "Dude, you're a hero," I just looked at him and I'm like, yeah, that's true. I basically admitted it. And so I thought that was one of the most honest moments of my life. And I learned a couple things, by the way, in that moment. Number one, I learned that, when your instructor says to you, "Pull your nose up, put your left aileron pirouette down and shoot an AIM-9 shot," you don't think about it, you just execute. I also learned that if you beat a MiG-29, everyone will buy you beer that night. I learned that too. And I have a very simple rule, which is if someone wants to buy a beer for you, you let them. And then the third thing I learned, which is actually really important, is when the window of opportunity opens up, you take the shot. And by the way, I took this principle not only into my flight career, but also into my business career. There are moments in your life, in your career, and in your relationships where when opportunities open up. And sometimes they're really short. Sometimes it's a 2-second opportunity in an airplane. Sometimes you got an opportunity for a new promotion, or you got like an opportunity to like brand yourself a little bit, or maybe to put yourself out on a podcast like this, or to share some stories. And I always tell people, like, when the window of opportunity opens up, take the shot. Don't think about it. Like, you thought about it ahead of time. You know what I'm saying? You planned all this stuff ahead of time. You don't have to like form a focus group. If the window of opportunity opens up, just take the shot. And that's why I like to think, like, one of the things you learn when you're in that combat scenario are these moments where you, like, when you have an opportunity, just take the shot. So I got to talk to the pilot afterwards, who is the commanding officer guy. We always do, like, anytime we fly against each other, we typically do a debrief. He was congratulatory, but also I don't think he was very happy about the conversation. So it wasn't like we had a good relationship with all those guys. He just didn't want to talk about it. So, and I guess I understand why, because like, he's like my age now. So, I mean, that was a pretty young guy at the time. It's like, just those things happen. Everybody has their day. I think when you accomplish something like that, again, I'd like to say it as clearly as I can. it was training that led me to that. It wasn't necessarily my intellect. It wasn't a giftedness. I was a good pilot. By the time I got trained, by the time I got into the spot where I was training other people at 1-on-1 dogfighting, I was a very good pilot. One of the best probably in the Marine Corps. Everybody asks, by the way, were you the best? And I would tell them, I have no way to know, because we had a lot of pilots. And on any given day, you got 5 or 6 guys that are probably really, really good. I can confidently say I was one of the best. I mean, I was one of the top 8 people in the entire Marine Corps who was training the entire Marine Corps F-18 pilots regarding tactics and weapons. And I was definitely the number 1 instructor for dogfighting. But I got there through training. I got there through just application and discipline. And there was something else kind of going for me too. I always thought like, maybe this is it for me. Maybe I'm not good enough. So I overshot myself. Like I told you, when I went into boot camp, I was running a 3 mile at 18 minutes, which is the best score you can get on our fitness test. I thought going into the Marine Corps that everybody was running 18-minute 3 miles, which, as you know, isn't true. Like most people don't, like it's only usually like 3 or 4 people out of 100 or whatever that are doing 18-minute. I thought everybody did that. And because I basically tricked myself into thinking everyone did that, I set an expectation for myself that I actually nailed that, you know? So I put myself into a higher category because I always thought like that sort of behavior was normal, and that helped me out a lot. My first experience setting foot on Iraqi soil, I flew in on a C-130. I landed in Kuwait, flew in from some base someplace into Al-Assad Air Base, which is basically way west of Fallujah, which is where we were doing Ramadi, where we were doing kind of a lot of fighting on the Euphrates River. And I flew in on a C-130. If you've ever gotten out of a C-130 while it was running, the way it works is you're sitting in the C-130. It's not Delta Airlines. It's like webbed seats. You know what I'm saying? And you land, you get to the end of the runway, and what they'll do is just open the back, like that tail ramp, and you just walk off the C-130. Now, in this case, the engines were still running. They got these 4 engines that put off like massive amounts of heat that are coming off there. And so I got on the back of the C-130. I got my big, huge like bag. I got my flight gear, and I'm walking in this airplane is hitting me. This airplane wind is hitting me, and it's like 140 temperature, 140 Fahrenheit wind hitting the back of my head, and it's like hot. And I keep feeling this airplane wind hitting me, or the exhaust hitting me in the back of the head. And I keep walking. I'm like, man, this is like hot air hitting the back of my head, and I can't seem to get away from it. And I'm still walking to where our maintenance department is, and I'm walking, and I get another 100 yards, and I turn around, and the C-130 isn't there. I just realized it was Iraq hitting me in the back of the head. Literally, it was July in the middle of Iraq. I don't know if you've ever been in July in the middle of Iraq, but it is hot, dry, and dusty, and it was windy. It was like 20-mile-an-hour winds. Iraq is the only place I've ever been to where when the wind picks up, it gets hotter. Like normal places, you get a nice breeze, it cools things down. But in Iraq, it just pushes hot air up against the back of your head. My first trip to Iraq was in 2004. So when I went to Iraq, I was part of our, there's a school in the Navy called Top Gun, which everyone's familiar with, which is like the weapons and training school. Well, actually, every service has one of those schools. The Marine Corps has a school called MOTS 1, which is Marine Aviation Weapons Tactics Squadron 1. It's our version of Top Gun. So I was one of the instructors at our Marine Corps school. So I was sent there as one of our instructors to go and deal with a particular weapons system problem that we had, and to do some flying over in combat. First mission, taking off in my F-18. It's about 1700, so 5 o'clock at night. The sun will be setting in about an hour or two. And I get on the runway. To put this in the context, I've got Mark 82s on one side, which is a 500-pound bomb. I've got 5-inch rockets on the other side, which is designed to shoot a little bit of a more precise target. Got a nose full of gun. I have 2 drop tanks, one on my left, one on my right, or one on my left, one on my belly. So I have a very heavy, very weighted down F-18. The single most dangerous part of a flight for an F-18 pilot is right at takeoff. Once we get above about 10, 12,000 feet in Iraq, we're pretty safe. Most of the time, the aircraft that are getting shot at are the helicopters. Most of the time they're getting shot at by small arms, AAA, IR, infrared weapons, maybe an RPG. And so a helicopter that's flying at like 500 feet is in the WEZ, what's called the Weapons Engagement Zone, basically for all those things. An F-18 flying at 10,000 feet is basically out of the Weapons Engagement Zone for everything. Okay, now we might be able to get shot at by an infrared missile like a SA-9 or something like that. But really no one in Iraq was willing to take that shot because the moment you shoot that, everyone knows that's where that guy just shot that thing. Okay, so So the most dangerous part of flight is literally right at takeoff, because you're right in the weapons engagement zone for all the things I just mentioned, and you're really slow, and you're very heavy. So your ability to defend yourself is not so good. The second most dangerous part, by the way, was coming into land, because you're slow, you got the gear down, you got the flaps down. For the most part, the rest of the flight, you're in pretty good shape. And so I'm in Iraq, and I'm in like combat for the very first time. And we've been getting rocketed, so we get like 122s. You probably experienced that too. Like you're sitting in your base eating, and next thing you know, everybody jumps under the table. Side note: first time I ever got shot at was when we got rocketed, and I didn't even know what it was. Honestly, I had no idea. And I always tell people, like the range of emotions you experience the first time you're getting shot at is wild. So the first thing when we started getting rocketed, first thing was confusion. Everybody jumped. We had these wooden, like plywood tables, Everybody jumped under the table, except for me. I was like, literally looking around like, where'd everybody go? They all jumped under. I don't even know why, because I don't think that wood would have helped, but they all jumped under the tables. And I remember looking around. I'm like, what happened? What's happening? And I keep in mind, like, at this point, I've been in the Marines for like 10 years. You know what I'm saying? So I probably should have known. Everybody's under the table. And I remember looking down at my buddy, who's like looking at me from under the table, and I was like, what? And he goes, dude, get under the table. We're getting rocketed. And I was like, oh, okay. And by the time I got under the table, it was all over. So I learned, like, maybe go a little faster, under this random sort of piece of plywood that's supposed to save your life. So there was first confusion. Then there's a little bit of acceptance, like, oh man, we're just getting shot at. And then the next thing, it's fascinating what happens, is you get pissed off. Like, I think everybody who's experienced combat at some point has experienced this one moment where you're like, I'm gonna kill everybody. Like, there's a moment where you're like, someone's trying to kill me? Man, that is like, no. And I always tell people, like, that's the moment as a warfighter where you learn to train your instincts, because you can't kill everybody. And you can't start fighting right away. You have to be refined in the way that you go about your approach. And I'm not here to talk about our rules of engagement. There's some pretty big issues when it comes to rules of engagement, especially in Iraq. So I'm not here to defend Congress or the DOD or anything like that. I'm just simply saying you go through a wild range of emotions when you get shot at, and at some point you get really pissed off. And what you do with that anger is really important as a warfighter. So back on the runway. I'm back on the runway in my F-18. We have been getting shot at. I know there's a chance at the end of the runway there could be someone trying to shoot at me. And so the way that we do this is we do what's called a low transition. Lead takes off about 10, 20 seconds before. And you sit on the end of the runway. It's about a 14,000 foot runway, which is quite long. That's because it's so hot. You go into full afterburner, like full beans. We're talking about 22,000 pounds out of each engine, maybe 44,000 pounds of thrust coming out of the airplane. Is a lot of thrust. Full afterburner, start running down the runway. At about 150 knots, you pull the nose up, you take off very gently, and then you push the nose over, put the gear and the flaps up. You pushing the nose over as a pilot is a very strange thing to do. Typically, when you take off an airplane, you take the stick or the throttle or the yoke, and you pull back until you set a rate of climb, and then you climb away from the runway. That's a normal takeoff. It's very abnormal for a pilot to take the airplane off of the runway, gear and flaps, and then push the nose back down. It's not what we ever get trained to do, but we do it in this particular case because you're trying to stay as close to the runway as humanly possible. In this case, about 10 feet off the runway. So you pull the nose up a little bit, put your gear and flaps up, then you push the nose back down, and you literally fly right over the runway in full afterburner, getting as much speed as you can. The idea is you want to be untargetable. When you're 10 feet off the ground, they're not going to be able to hit you. And in that window, from basically 0 to 10,000 feet, you want to be as fast as you can. So you're flying down the runway, 200 knots, 300, 250, 300, 350, 400, and right about 450 knots, which is fast in an airplane with that much gear. You literally pull your nose directly up at about 60 degrees and go, whoosh. As I started to fly up, turned and looked over to my right-hand shoulder, turned and looked over my left-hand shoulder, and I'm looking for smoke trails. In this particular case, I didn't see any smoke trails at all. Continue to climb to about 10,000 feet, level the airplane off, and start to go about my mission. That's the first mission I ever flew. Fast forward about a month. I'm on the runway, about to do my 30th takeoff and go into the air. And I can tell you the sense that I had at this moment was nothing more than normalcy. I'd done this so many times. I'll do this again. I always tell people, I was the most dangerous I've ever been in an airplane in that moment right there. Like in the first day, I was going to be fine. Whatever happened, I was going to be fine because my vigilance was like hyper. But after 30 takeoffs, you start to get into a feeling where you're like, I'm feeling a little invincible now. And you feel like you've done this enough times, and that's when you're dangerous. I always tell folks, whether you're in the corporate space, the business space, or even if you're a warfighter, the most dangerous moment, like when we talk about pilots, you'd think that the young pilots would be the most dangerous. The window, if you understand aviation statistics, the window is about 500 hours. So from 500 hours to 1,000 hours. To put it in the context, as a pilot, you start logging hours in airplane. And when you get through training, you're at about 250, maybe 300 hours. When you get to your first squadron, you start amassing. So about a year, maybe a year and a half into your first squadron, you hit that 500 hour mark. And when you hit 500 hours, you actually become very, very dangerous. And that's because you start to feel complacent. You're like, I've been there, I've done that, I got the t-shirt. After 1,000 hours, you've almost killed yourself enough times to know like, hey, I can't trust me. About after 1,000 hours, I got to the point where I was like, basically everyone's trying to kill me. I'm trying to kill me. My wingman's trying to kill me. My adversary's trying to kill me. The dude in the control tower is trying to kill. I just assumed everybody was trying to kill me, and that actually made me the safest pilot in the world. But the most dangerous I think I ever was in combat, it was on that 30th takeoff where I was like routine. So when I was in Iraq, so 2004, 2005, full disclosure, like there was not a lot for F-18s to do. One of the biggest issues I had on the procurement side, I literally went to generals to talk about this issue, is that the F-18 munition was designed for something a little bit closer to the first Iraq war and not the second Iraq war, right? So when we went into 91, I was in high school in 91, but we went into 91, we were like dropping big bombs, dropping GPS, or at this point it wasn't even GPS, but laser guided munitions through bunkers, through command and control nodes, through like infantry units or something like that. We were dropping big ordnance with big effects to try to blow through. By the time we got to Iraq in like 2003, when we did OEF, you're fighting against an insurgency. And so you didn't have like, the forces that we were going against in 2003 did not like array themselves in battle against this, where you could see like, all right, they got, 500 people out there. They hid in mosques, or they like stuck themselves into little apartment buildings and were shooting at us. Or the worst thing about that war is they would put like an explosive device in the road with a remote detonator, or they would put a set of 122 mortar tubes out in the middle of a field, set it on a timer for 2 days and walk away. And literally some Iraqi farmer would be sitting, farming, and all of a sudden see mortars launched out of the middle of his farm, having no idea those were even there. And so in a lot of cases in Iraq, we were fighting against like folks that weren't even there, or folks that had been there 2 days before. So as an F-18 pilot, we were there for a couple of reasons. Number one, we did not have small enough ordnance to be able to help significantly in a counterinsurgency event, especially in a small local environment. Like when we were fighting in Fallujah, we had Marines literally going block to block. So the rockets I mentioned, those 5-inch rockets, were perfect for that scenario where you could put a rocket through a window. But a 82 Mark 82, which is a 500-pound bomb, is the smallest size bomb we carried. That 500-pound bomb would level an entire building. The problem with leveling an entire building, you have Marine infantry who's trying to maneuver through the town, and bricks and stones everywhere is a challenge to be able to maneuver through town. That gives a lot of places for the enemy to hide to. So we rarely were dropping those 82s. A lot of times we were shooting rockets. So the primary reason that we were there is to support Marines on the ground who were in fire maneuver situations, primarily suppression, fire, or like we had a sniper on the top of a roof that we were trying to hit with a 5-inch or a laser guided bomb. Second reason we were there were eyes. So we had our forward-looking infrared system and our eyes to typically overwatch, like if we had convoys or people moving through town, or people moving from point A to point B. If you remember Iraq, after, I don't remember, 8 or 9 at night, it was basically a complete curfew. So if anybody was moving, like if there were any vehicles moving, it was either our convoys or it was enemy, right? So you could typically see kind of like ahead to be able to give convoys a heads up on that. The third reason we were there, which is the most enjoyable part of my time in Iraq, by the way, was what we call show of force. I don't know if you've ever seen an F-18 fly 600 miles an hour, 100 feet off the ground with bombs and rockets on the side. But an F-18 flying that fast rips a hole in the sky audibly. It is one of the loudest things you'll ever hear in your entire life. And it actually does something to a person physically. The benefit, by the way, of an F-18 flying at 600 miles an hour and 100 or 200 feet is when you're flying that fast, you're basically at roughly at about 0.95 Mach. You're almost at the speed of sound. When you fly almost at the speed of sound, the sound waves are mostly behind you, right? So as I'm talking right now, all the sound waves are going out equally in 180 degrees. But if I was flying forward at 600 miles an hour, most of the sound waves would be behind me because you're catching up to the sound waves as you're flying, right? So what happens is when you fly that low and you fly that fast is it basically scares people, and they have no idea that you were coming. They often see you before they hear you. So they see an airplane and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose with the sound. A lot of what we were doing was that. So for example, I had one of my one of my guys on the ground, his name was Gretzky. He's an F-18 pilot who's actually a forward air controller. And they're on the ground, they're moving basically from block to block. And as they started moving from block to block, a group of insurgents kind of form a little band and they start moving towards our Marines. Now, just, our Marines can handle that situation, but they would rather not. It's just a fight that they have to go back and talk about, and then they have to figure out if there are any civilian casualties. And so basically, he asked for what's called a show of force. And what that means is I drop down from 15,000 feet down to 200 feet, put the afterburners full on at about 600 miles an hour, and fly as fast and low across that city as humanly possible. The moment I go across the city, in this case, I literally pull the nose directly up, that's pointing afterburner directly back at the ground, and fly directly back up to 15,000 feet. If you've ever seen an F-18 do that, number one, it's very impressive, and number two, it'll scare the hell out of you. And literally the moment that happens, in my case, every time I did this show of force, literally that armed band of militia find their way quickly back to something because they're convinced that they're about to get shot. And so a lot of what I did in Iraq was what's called show of force, which is designed to basically disperse a problem before a problem starts. Yeah, I mean, so I'm at the top of my game, right? So I'm an instructor in our Marine Corps weapons school, #1 instructor in the Marine Corps for 1-against-1 dogfighting. And I'm in Iraq. So my second trip in Iraq, the one that I'm talking about where I did the show of force, and I'm over Fallujah, actually. I'm just covering a convoy. So there's no weapons being fired. I'm just covering a convoy. And my mind starts to wander. I don't know if you ever had that before, like you're driving, and like 10 minutes go by because you were just thinking about something else. I can tell you when you're driving and your mind wandering, that's no big deal. But like when you are flying over a place where people want to kill you, your mind wandering in an F-18 in a tactical situation is not that good of a deal. And what I discovered was my mind was wandering back. I was in Iraq, but about literally 12 time zones away in Yuma, Arizona, where I lived at the time, was my wife and my first baby, my first daughter. She was 5 months old. So this was 2005. She was born in April. I was in Iraq in July. So May, June, July. Yeah, three and a half months old. And I remember thinking about her. I was like, wonder where she is, and like, wonder what they're doing. Like when you have a kid, like it changes a lot of things for you. And I remember thinking, I don't think I'm going to come back here anymore. Like I didn't have an issue with what we were doing. I really enjoyed the mission. Loved the time with my Marines. I really enjoyed like what we were doing. I liked being in combat. Felt good about the mission that we had in the world. But I remember thinking, man, I don't want my home life, being dominated by like an empty chair at the dinner table. And so I thought about it, prayed about it a lot, ended up talking to my wife a little bit about it, and decided to leave the Marine Corps. I was going to stay in the reserves, going to keep flying. I ended up flying F-5s. But I went into my commanding officer's office. I'll never forget this day. He was eating dates. And just to put it in context, like I was really young to be a weapons school instructor. And I was particularly good at what I did, which meant I essentially could write my ticket from there. I was going to end up being a staff officer for probably a year in Iraq, and then I was going to come back and be a maintenance officer or a operations officer as a pilot, and then eventually find my way to being a CO and then kind of move the ranks from there. And if I wanted to, I could be a general right now, probably, if I'd kept with that trajectory. And so because things were going so well, this colonel was like eating dates, and I said, hey, sir, just, at the end of my tour, which is a year later, I'm going to be getting out of the Marine Corps. And he started choking, like it took him so off guard. And so I did, and I was like, I don't know what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to leave. Now, most pilots, just so you know, most pilots in the military are really type A personalities, as you can imagine, kind of risk takers. And then for some reason, they end up in like the most benign job, which is flying airlines. And that's the direction I was going, because everybody does that. If you put in a package to fly with the airlines, and like you start using your flight hours to like fly for United or for Delta or whatever. Just so you know, I'm not the kind of person that likes doing the same thing twice. And I really don't like I loved flying, all the tactical parts of the flying, but I didn't like any of the other parts, like the paperwork, or even the administrative portions of the flight. I just like fighting, dropping bombs and stuff like that. I'll never forget this, dude. We were like watching a movie. My wife and I were sitting on the couch watching a movie, and she grabs the remote and she pushes stop. And she looks at me and goes, is that really what you want to do? Like, do you really want to fly for the airlines? And I was like, I don't think so. And it's crazy. Like it took someone else who knew me really well to be like, is that really what you want to do? I was like, I don't think I want to do that. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. But I knew that I was going to fly for the airlines. So back in 2006, 2007, like the internet was really kind of picking up. It was still kind of in its Wild West days. But I went on a deployment, or like a 2-week TDY kind of thing, over to Japan. I was training some pilots. I was on my way out, but I was still working. I had like a few more months until I got out. And I was training some pilots, and on the way over, I pulled my computer out and I started writing a book on how to be a fighter pilot. And I literally was like, if you want to be a fighter pilot, here are the 3 services that fly jets. And here are the ways to get into those 3 services. And here are the airplanes that everyone flies. And I wrote like a 150-page book. Like if I was going to sit down next to a 17-year-old and explain to this dude or dudette how to get into the military and how to fly airplanes, I wrote this book. And I put like a cover on it. It was an ebook. It wasn't even like a real book. I put a cover on it and put it online. And I was like, I don't even know what I should charge for it. So I put it up for like $24. But I thought that was too much. So I took a 30% off and I made it like $17, something like that. And then I went to bed. Woke up the next morning and I had a sale. Like literally somebody paid me $17. I was like, man, we're going to celebrate tonight. We're going to go out to dinner. I'm going to take you, I don't know, what, McDonald's or something like that. But it was like a really big deal. And I don't know if you've ever been in business before, for those of you who are watching, but like the first time you make money is kind of like a big deal. And that first guy, by the way, he emailed me and he said, dude, I've been looking for this stuff for so long. Thank you for putting it all together. It really changed like my approach. And a couple years later, that dude ended up becoming an Air Force fighter pilot. Super cool story, like of that first guy. So I started creating these CDs and literally like marketing through the internet. Next thing you know, I'm making like six figures plus this little book, this little ebook, and a bunch of CDs, MP3s or whatever they were online. And really, what I was doing is I was getting paid to learn. I was getting paid to understand how to use the internet to market a particular product or service. I was getting paid to learn how to communicate effectively to get people to say yes, and how to keep your promises, like how to say you're going to give someone something and then give them more. And I always tell business owners, I work with a lot of business owners, the key to business is to do everything you promise and to under promise, over deliver, right? So most businesses over promise, under deliver. If you say you're going to give people 8 things, give them 10, surprise them, give them extra. And I started doing that. Next thing you know, I came to my dad. You remember way back in this podcast, my dad was this famous basketball referee. I was like, hey, Dad, I'm teaching these people how to be fighter pilots. Maybe we should teach basketball referees. And he's like, well, let's do that. So we created the exact same thing, little online course to train basketball referees to be better basketball referees. Next thing you know, this is like a 6-figure business too. So I got like 2 of these things running. I'm kind of surprising myself with how things are working. And next thing you know, I started having people ask me advice. So I would go to these events, and I would like stand up on stage and teach some of the stuff that I was learning about how to use the internet or how to communicate or how to over deliver. And I was kind of aw shucks because I didn't even know how to speak at the time. I do it now professionally. And I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing, but I'm like explaining this to people, and people would come up to me after I would talk, and they would go, hey, can I take you to lunch so I can pick your brain? They'd say it the same way every time. And I call this stage in my life free lunch lessons, because I would sit there at lunch and the people wouldn't pay me anything. But I would like let them pick my brain. And I was doing that for a little while before I realized like I should probably charge money, to give people advice. So I had a friend of mine come and say, hey, we want to spend a whole day with you. We want to spend a day and we want to create this new product. It's like a product like you created, and then we want to sell this product like you sell your products. And he said, how much will that be? And I said, Henry, my normal price is $5,500. By the way, just so you know, I didn't have a normal price because I never did this before. I said, like, my normal price is $5,500, but for you, I'll do it for $2,500. And he said, I'll take it. And I thought, I should have just said $5,500. So he said, I'll take it. So I did a coaching day with these guys. Just so you know, I had no idea what I was doing. I showed up with no preparation at all. I just knew if I asked them the right questions, we would eventually get to the answers. So I asked them a bunch of questions about their product. We put together an entire offering that they were going to do. They went out the next week, 100% true story. They went out the next week and sold $189,000 of this product in a single event. And I was like, man, I should have charged them $5,500. I should have taken a commission on that. But I learned the value of what you have up here. And I always tell people, you would be surprised at how much you take for granted when people ask your opinion on certain things. Like, for example, I had the boldness to be able to offer my knowledge and experience on how to be a fighter pilot, so that when people invested, and all they had to do was invest $47 or $97, wasn't even that much. They got some of my time, but they also got some of my expertise. I encouraged my dad to be able to like share his information. And I started to learn, like, when people invest in themselves, they really pay attention and they like really consume the content, right? And so I started being successful at helping these people. So like I would have entrepreneurs come to me and go, hey, how much does it cost to work with you? And I was like, now it's $5,500, and now it's $7,500, and now it's $10,000. And I literally went from $2,500 all the way up to well over $50,000. That's what I'm charging nowadays for like entrepreneurs to like work one-on-one with me. The quality goes up, by the way, the more people pay you, and oftentimes the result goes up. And they're obviously like high performing entrepreneurs, but really that's when I started getting in the business of like giving people advice, The rest of the story, kind of as the trajectory goes, is after I started working with entrepreneurs, probably like 200-300 entrepreneurs I had worked with one-on-one and helping them grow their business and like really connecting to their life, is I started writing books. And so the second to last book I wrote is a book called 21 Day Miracle. And it's just a book to show people how to get things done fast. My experience is that most business owners, entrepreneurs, and career people take the slow way to do almost everything. And there's a fast way to do almost everything. If you want to get in shape, you want a good relationship, if you want to break addiction, if you want to have more money, if you want to have a better mindset, there's actually a really fast way to do it. It just requires training, like going back to that very first story that I told you. And so that book basically teaches people how to like do things fast. And then the last book I taught, so about 400 clients in when I started working with people, what I understood is I pray a lot. And I understood I could start asking God questions for my client. I could start getting like really strategic intelligence for their business. And people used to kind of get blown away at how specific and strategic of the wisdom that I was receiving when I was simply praying. And then I realized I could teach anyone how to do this. Doesn't matter their faith background. I literally can teach atheists. I have taught atheists how to do this. And so my last book I wrote was basically teaching people how to ask God questions about their business and get answers. Those are the events that I do kind of now. 400 or 500 people come and literally like spend 3 days sort of downloading at the events that we do. And like it all leverages back to that first story. Like I failed kindergarten, you know? And so my approach to teaching is never sort of like I'm the guru at the top of the mountain. Like if you see some of these like personal development leaders, the whole idea is like they got that all figured out and no one else does. My approach to teaching is very simple. I'm a person who's on the journey. Like I'm on the road as like everyone else is on the road. And if there's a way that I can help you speed that up or be more efficient, I'd love to be able to give you some advice, to be able to give you some new ideas, but never exalt myself as though I'm like the top of the mountain. Always kind of explain that I'm on the journey with them. And there's actually really like a really cool place in that accessibility, and especially in business. You give me a person who is on purpose, like literally a person who knows what they were created for and knows what they're supposed to do. I will show you a person who has no issues with addiction. I'll show you a person who has no issue falling asleep at night, waking up in the morning. I'll show you a person who has no issue like dialing in their calendar, getting their stuff straight, and making decisions. In my opinion, purpose is like the most important thing, especially for guys to have. And the wonderful thing about the military is, we have a system called orders. And so like your purpose is written on a piece of paper. You know what I'm saying? So like I got a piece of paper that said, I'm going to Miramar to fly F-18s. Those are called official military orders. So my purpose was written on a piece of paper. It wasn't hard for me to figure that out. When I went into combat, like we would do 5-paragraph order. You're familiar with that because you're a Marine. Situation, mission, execution, admin and logistics, command and signal, right? You knew what you were doing because the second word in SMEAC is mission. You said, like I sat there in infantry training and they said, your mission is attack to destroy the enemy on Hill 361. And I'm like, I know my purpose now is to get up on the Hill 361. When I was flying airplanes, the same thing. They're like, here's our mission today. It's to defend this convoy moving through the town of Fallujah. I'm like, awesome. I know for the next 2 hours my whole purpose in life is to defend that convoy that goes through the town of Fallujah. So as a warfighter, you always know your mission, you always know the calling, and it's really easy because somebody else already figures it out for you, you know? And then you find yourself like in the real world. And I will just say, like, I didn't have any major mental health issues coming out of war. I certainly didn't have any like PTSD or anything like that. I've like really dear friends of mine that had significant issues with that. And to be fair, they saw some stuff that I did not get to see, or I shouldn't say the word get, that they saw some stuff that I did not see. They saw some best friends of theirs literally die right in front of them. They saw dudes with gaping chest wounds or limbs that had lost. I was very protected in the safety of an F-18 not to be able to see that. So I know guys who saw some really crazy stuff out there. I did not see that. I was very blessed not to be able to see that. And so even getting attacked, rocketed, that wasn't like a huge issue for me coming back. What was an issue was coming out of the Marines and feeling a little sense of purposelessness. Like I told the story about not being an airline pilot, but eventually trying to find those businesses that I created. But there was always a sense for me that I was like, I wonder if this is what I was actually made to do, or I wonder if this is what I was called to do. And that question never came up in the military, because like the military answers that question for you, you know? Not only do they answer that question for you, but they take care of everything for you. Like if you need medical, you got medical. And if you need like insurance, they got insurance. And if you need like to move, they like pack you up and move you. Like the military did a really amazing job of like putting this huge blanket of protection around you. And all of a sudden a veteran finds himself in the real world where like all of a sudden like all those options are up to you. You got to figure out like if you're going to go to USAA or not. And so that can be very sort of tumultuous for a person who's used to being told sort of what their thing is. And I always tell people the most important thing you can find in your life is purpose. Your job is to find out what you were created to do on planet Earth. And I will just tell you, I've coached thousands at this point, people through that particular process. I think there's nothing more important than to find out what you're created to do. I'm obviously a firm believer that God is in heaven and you're on earth, and he has created every individual for something very unique. I also believe that he has no plan B. In other words, God created you to do something that only you can do. I have a 6-year-old, so I have 4 kids, 19, 17, 16, 6. I always tell people I do know what causes that. It's not my second wife, it's my first wife. Those are all the common questions I get. But if you have a 6-year-old, you're very familiar with the tales of Winnie the Pooh. And Winnie the Pooh, my 2 favorite characters that I identify with the most are Eeyore, who's kind of depressed all the time, and Tigger. And the reason I love Tigger is because he says, look, the wonderful thing about Tigger is I'm the only one. And so you as an entrepreneur, or you as a business person, or you as a career person, or just a former military person have been given something amazing to do. And God created you as the only one. He doesn't have a backup plan. He doesn't have any sort of like anyone waiting to take your job. It's you, it's you, it's you, it's you. And one of the things I love to do is just help people ask God those questions to be able to try to find out what you were called to do. In my opinion, by the way, there's amazing tools for vets. I think you all know this, but there's all different kinds of therapies and help regarding PTSD and all that stuff. I'm not denying the power of any of those things. I'm just simply saying understanding who you are and what you're created to do is simply put the most important thing that you can find. That's why, by the way, that the book that I mentioned, God Talks, one of the exercises in the book literally is you asking questions from God to download answers about your purpose. And let me just tell you, when you find that, the decisions you make become very simple. The yeses and the nos become really easy. Like, for example, when I got introduced to Josh, we started talking about this podcast. It was the easy thing to say yes, because this is perfectly in line with the purpose that I've been created to do on planet Earth. But I've been asked to be on other shows or other podcasts where it just wasn't a fit, like alignment. It just wasn't the right group or the right show or anything. Those are easy no's. My point in saying this is like yeses and no's become really easy when you know who you are and you know what you're created to do. So yeah, if I was going to give advice to somebody who's been in war, or certainly a veteran in any capacity who's like trying to figure out like what's next, I would say ask questions about your purpose first. Like, find out what you're created to do. By the way, sometimes the answer isn't like what you want to do. Sometimes it's like literally sitting inside of you. It just needs to come out. First of all, thank you for being here. Thanks for getting to the end, by the way. Very few people implement all the way to the end. There's a lot of people that watch the beginning of the show and not the end. I just want to say congratulations for that. Can I give them a website? Is that cool?
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So look, if you're looking for a little bit more information, I kind of talked at the end of the show about how to connect with God, how to get some questions answered. Go to the website, godtalks.com. That's the easiest website to remember. It's godtalks.com. When you get there, I have a series of audios. They're completely free to you. You don't have to pay a dime. You can just simply download those, listen to them on iTunes, whatever you want to do. And those exercises are simple exercises where you can ask God questions about yourself, your life, your purpose, your family, and more. And they're totally free. You can have those at godtalks.com. I did write a book called God Talks. I'll just tell you, it doesn't matter what background you come from, religiously or not religiously. It's a book written to show people how to connect to their creator, to dial in their purpose, and to totally change the world. And I'm very optimistic, by the way, about the world. I think we're heading in a great direction. I know the news media would like to tell you otherwise. But man, I work with people around the world. I go and speak at events around the world. And I see optimism in the eyes, not only of our generation, but the generation behind us. And I think that we're really going to change things. So yeah, go to the website, connect, say hello. I'd love to hear your story. Put a comment, by the way, down here. If you're on YouTube, put a comment below. I'd love to that. I'll be reading the comments and replying to those as well. I'd love to just be able to connect with you, hear a little bit about your story, and go change the world. But let me just tell you, God created you for something extraordinary, much like Tigger. You're the only one, and God has no plan B. So go and execute that mission. Have a great time and change the world. I'll talk to you soon.